Rise, renew, reconnect. Welcome to From the Ashes, where every episode ignites hope and healing. Last month, I had a very unique experience as an assistant tour guide. I helped take two heavy metal bands, the Lords of the Trident and the Seven Spires, plus their fan club, all over Japan for 2.5 weeks. Going into the experience, I didn't know anything about metal music. And suffice it to say that after 2.5 weeks, I returned home a changed woman. So today, I'm bringing on the drummer of Seven Spires, Dylan Gowan, to talk about the magic of heavy metal, Japan, and so much more. Enjoy this episode of From the Ashes.
Shut the fire in the darkest night, the phoenix burns. It's ready for flight. Shadows may come, try to tear you apart, but you're the flame that ignites.
All right, everyone, welcome back to From the Ashes. I am your host, Valerie Beck, and today I have a guest from Toronto. His name is Dylan Gowan, and he is the new drummer for the band Seven Spires. And it's funny because I actually don't know too much about metal music, but Dylan is in Seven Spires, which is a really awesome heavy metal band. And the reason why I brought him on today is because we both just came back from 2.5 weeks touring in Japan together, me as one of the assistant tour guides and Dylan as the drummer for Seven Spires. So I wanted to jump right into that by kind of digging into that common thread that we've had, and then we'll go a little bit into that metal music and what it means or what metal music means to you. Let's start off with the question of, actually, no, why don't I give the audience a little bit of background?
All good.
Like, why were we in Japan together? What is this whole metal thing? Because people know me more as a holistic health coach, and I talk a lot about wellness on the show. I talk a lot about art on the show as me being a hip hop artist, a dancer, and how art has helped heal and form my journey. And so going to Japan at the beginning of December, I was called on to be a tour guide. That's a profession that I've had in the past. And it was for the Seven Spires and Lords of the Trident, two heavy metal bands from America, bringing their fan club along. So it was you guys and your fan club, which I thought was just so amazing, very unique. Everyone that I told this about was very intrigued by this. And it turned out to be so much more than I thought it would be. I had so much fun on this trip. And it was also amazing to watch you guys play as we traveled through Japan. So we started off in the north of Japan in Sendai. We made our way down back to Tokyo and then to Kansai and then all the way down to Fukuoka, all along with like 50 some odd people. Wild experience and just such a great way to get to know metal music and also the metal scene in Japan. That being said, Dylan, what was your favorite part of the Japan experience?
Man, that's really, really hard to answer because the whole experience itself was just amazing. It was like amazing that we get to go and play practically every night, and then also bring a bunch of our fans to Japan just to see this really unique experience of going to see all the different sites and all the different cities, as well as playing in a lot of these venues throughout the country. And it was really unique to also talk with a lot of metal fans from Japan and play with a lot of local bands. And what was really, really special was the show in Osaka. Ty from Lords of the Trident and we were really big fans of the band that opened the show, which was Bloodstained Child. And he and I have listened to them since high school. And we were kind of weirded out by it in the sense of like, shouldn't we open the show and they close? But it was this weird kind of show because it's like kind of surreal that a band that you listen to for a while and you get to share the stage with them. And you're just kind of going, this isn't real. This is not real, that we're playing literally in their hometown. They're opening the show. And like, you're just blown away by that. And you're surrounded by your friends and people who follow the band, as well as making new friends from Osaka and everywhere from Japan. So yeah, I think just the experience in general, it's really hard to pin down one highlight because the whole trip itself was a massive highlight.
Amazing. Yeah, I remember Ty telling me about that, how he was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe they're gonna open for us." So I actually witnessed a few moments because as the tour guide, I kind of get to just watch you all. It's my responsibility, right? Just make sure like you're you're fed, you get enough rest, like everything's taken care of. But I also get to see like what goes on because I get to watch the shows and everything. So from the audience perspective, and then just watching everyone in the audience too, I want to tell you an anecdote that I think is what really made this experience special for me. I don't remember if it was Osaka or one of the shows after, but you guys were on stage playing a song. And I turned around, and two of the guests in your fan club that you brought along that aren't related or anything like that, but were clearly like friends before, they just turned around and looked at each other and gave each other this huge and longest, most loving hug. And it was something about the music that was just having them have this moment. And I just thought how fortunate I was to be able to witness that, but also like how special that is because a lot of us are we don't have this group where we travel internationally together. We're like tight knit and like, but you guys have this thing where, not only are your fans also kind of like your friends, but they're also really tight with each other. Some of them travel around together outside of this tour too. And I just saw how tight that relationship was. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's really amazing to kind of witness that because a lot of times within metal, there's a bit of a instant friendship that kind of happens with a lot of fellow metalheads because metal is a very niche genre. Like not everyone really understands it. And so it feels like when somebody likes the same type of music that you do, you kind of understand them right away because a lot of metalheads are similar personality wise. And so once you kind of see a band that you like or see somebody that's like walking and you recognize the band shirt, you kind of like there's this like some sort of spider sense that you get going like, oh, I know that you listen to good music, that kind of thing. And a lot of people they just really I mean with Seven Spires music especially, they it's one of those bands where it's so authentic when it comes to the emotional component of the songs itself. Like, I mean, Adrian, Jack, and Peter, they're all such strong songwriters. And they play with such, not only such intensity, but with such emotion too. And so with them, it's like they're not putting on, I mean, they're putting on a show, but it's also, these are also real emotions that they're getting out on stage every single night. And that's also heard with the audience as well. And they get that as well too, because they can put their own experience within the lyrics and with the music themselves. They can put their own stamp on the story that's being told. So it's really interesting to see how they react to the music as well as us seeing their reaction. And so sometimes we see people in the audience, they cry during the set, or sometimes they hug, or sometimes they mosh like crazy. Like in Fuoka, we had a conga line.
Yeah.
So it was kind of cool to see all these different reactions, and we get to see that every night. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I think that was very unique and really incredible. It was my first time witnessing moshing, although I have to say I probably got the tamest version of moshing that I will ever get. But, relating it back to my own experience, right? Like I think because I come from a hip hop world where a lot of the emotion that's being expressed comes from a very specific history, like a
Mhm.
social history and, certain emotions that come with that are more prevalent, right? And like, the first one that comes up for me when I think of hip hop is anger and yeah, I mean that would be the first one that comes up, right? But it's expressed in a very particular way. Sometimes it is kind of in this like, it's an expression of a view of life that isn't always it's like strength, but also there is this sadness to it as well.
Mhm.
What do you think is the core of like metal music?
It's tough to say because you can express all different emotions within metal.
Yeah.
Like it's not, I mean, anger is definitely one of them for sure because of the screaming and because it's like it's not enough sometimes to say I'm angry by saying I'm angry. Sometimes you have to scream it. And then a lot of people relate to that because they wanted to scream when they're upset as well. So there is a ton of anger. There's also a lot of sadness, but there's also a lot of uplifting moments within metal as well. So there's some metal bands like one of the bands that opened the show, Japanese folk metal. They're a complete party band. So they're
Mhm.
all about having a good time and drinking and like celebrating and doing all that stuff. And then you get some metal bands that are just angry, aggressive, and the music backs up that intensity. But there's also and that intensity is also resonates with a lot of hip hop too, and that's why there's a lot of crossover between hip hop and metal, where sometimes you get like the new metal movement, which incorporated a ton of hip hop stuff into it, and then you also get groups like some crossover thrash bands. They really adapted a lot of hip hop's attitude as well within their music, and sometimes you even just get bands that collaborate. Like we had Run DMC and Anthrax with Bring the Noise, and how that was like the first step into really kind of hip hop and metal trying to like take the two styles and kind of blend them together. And then eventually over time, it's like you'll get groups like Body Count, which was fronted by Ice-T, and he brought his intensity within rap music, but also he loves metal music as well. So he just combined both of them and he created something that's unique to him, and that inspires a whole other list of a ton of bands that combine those two elements together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just like, when I say like there's one emotion that comes up, it's like there's definitely a whole range in each category, right? In each
Oh yeah.
genre of music. But it's just like looking at the origins of things. And I want to dig into that a little bit more after, but kind of just going along with the Japan discussion, I want to also ask you, what are some experiences that really surprised you or stuck with you about the tour in Japan, like the people, the places, and the culture?
I mean, I've never seen a 9 band festival be so organized in my life than Nagoya. It was because back home, it's like a logistical nightmare to organize 9 bands that could have 4 to 6 members, sometimes even 7. So it's insane how everybody like there was a corner in each of the backstage where everyone would place all their gear, and it was so well organized that the moment they would be done, they would take their gear, put it away outside, like whether it's like in their cars or back home or what have you, but it was gone. And it was just like this structure that everybody kind of understood the assignment. Like the moment that you were done, the gear goes out of the venue, and then the next band puts their gear on stage. And then when they're done, they bring it out. And it's normally not like that because like sometimes if you're in a festival, they'll just leave their gear backstage,
Yeah.
and we're kind of like walking over everybody's gear to kind of put ours on stage. And that doesn't and that never happened in Japan. Everyone was so it was so well structured that it was almost uncomfortable like because we're not used to that.
Yeah.
And what also really shocked me was the reaction of the audience, because what I noticed is that the audience in Japan can be very reserved at times. And normally when we're playing in North America or some parts of Europe, because some parts in Europe they're also very reserved as well. But in Canada and the United States, they'll go they'll go all out. And sometimes when we see people that are in the audience that are reserved, sometimes you feel like, are we blowing it? Are we like we're not playing that, are we? No, 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 I don't think so. I remember I turned to Jack one of the shows where the audience was just kind of sitting there like this, like not arms crossed, but kind of like just kind of watching, like as if we were kind of not playing as well, but we thought we were doing okay. But then after the show, you get surrounded and you're like, that was so amazing. We can't wait for you to come back. And you're like, in the back of your head, you're like, oh, oh, sweet. Okay. Sugoi. So it's just that sometimes they're really engaged with the music itself rather than expressing it like throwing the horns or headbanging or moshing or doing all that stuff. So a lot of the times it's just very much like they're really listening to everybody on stage, and then they'll clap, and then and yeah, it's just like it's just their way of going to a concert and expressing their love for the music.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually haven't been to many concerts in Japan, so that was my first time, or one of my first times really, just like being in the audience and watching them. Although I did see some headbanging for sure. I think the
Yeah.
people who really get into it, or like I think maybe some of the people who relate a lot with the metal culture, they'll
Mhm.
they'll do the stuff, right? They'll do the moshing, they'll do all of that. Yeah, like I know that when I'm in the States and I'm in a dead crowd, it's so sad for me.
Yeah.
So, like I actually get really, because as a dancer, I also want to like kind of let loose in all of that. And when nobody else wants to do it, I feel kind of like, oh, well, I guess I won't do it either
Gotcha.
sometimes. But I felt like a good mix of that in the audience watching you guys is like, I can headbang if I want, but also I could just chill if I want to, and no one's making, it doesn't feel like I'm being pressured either way, which is really cool.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. With that being said, knowing that like in Japanese culture and with all of that, they engage with metal music a certain way. And then you said that the European crowds can tend to be a little bit reserved too. Like, how do you, since you've traveled the world playing your music, how do you see different cultures receive your music differently? And why do you think that is?
I think it just has to do with just my guess is just it could just be standard concert etiquette. Like I think sometimes a lot of people who and I think it has to do also with the environment as well. Like I think that sometimes to be respectful to the artist, sometimes it's not to be overly expressive because that could be distracting for the person who really wants to like sit and enjoy the music for what it is rather than just kind of the extra stuff that's going on. Like in Scandinavia, there is some parts where like Norway, in some parts of Norway, they were very reserved, but in Sweden, they went crazy. And then, and I know in Toronto goes ham at every single show that they go to, except for classical music, where everyone kind of understands the assignment of like everyone sits down and they listen to the music and they don't get up or clap until the very end of the show. So I think it just really has to do with the exception of the mini rant. I think it's just like I think really it's just standard concert etiquette that varies from different countries. And then when you understand that, you don't have to overthink about you're playing on stage. You just go out and you just play.
Yeah, for sure. I think that makes sense too, because like even though I would go to like a hip hop concert or like a house event or like jazz, like each of those settings have different behavioral expectations. We just don't think about it because we take it for granted, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Okay. I would like to ask you then, have you ever like did you start off as a fan of metal music before you got into playing it, or were you kind of like, I want to be a metal musician?
Well, I mean, it started out by just being a fan of rock music, like, and that was passed. Then that love of rock music was passed down from, my family who was really involved, like loved like 70s progressive rock, like Yes and Genesis and King Crimson, and they also loved, some of the art rock stuff like David Bowie and some of the kind of shock rock stuff like Alice Cooper. So there's always a love of rock music. But then there was a program that in Canada called Much Loud. So like Much Music was kind of like the equivalent of like MTV. And I remember watching Much Music, and around midnight, like every like Friday and Saturday, they would play like punk and they would play metal music. And I remember I was just kind of flicking the channels and I just kind of sat down and watched like one video and I loved it. And I'm like, oh, what's the next band that's playing? And I just remember just getting like bombarded with so many great bands like System of a Down, Deftones. There would be some Slayer on it. There would be Metallica, Motorhead, Iron Maiden. So you just get like a list of all of these like really amazing bands. And I would just be so excited every single time that that show would come on. I would run down to the basement with a pen and paper and I'd just write down all the bands that were playing. And and then eventually they started playing heavier, like even heavier stuff than that. Like you would get some obituary, sometimes you would get death, you would get deicide, a lot of the more extreme bands that kind of followed after like the thrash movement. And and then I really started to explore more of the extreme metal side when I was in high school. And a friend of mine, he handed me a copy of Opeth, and I loved how it was progressive rock, but like a metal's version of it, and really got involved into the progressive metal scene, where it was like the next evolution of like all the bands like Yes and Genesis, but bringing in more of a metal component to it, but still keeping it so experimental. Started really listening to bands like Opeth and Cynic, Catatonia, Between the Buried and Me, Sixth, Protest the Hero. Who else? Periphery and Animals as Leaders. So it's like a whole list of these bands that were metal, but they were also very experimental as well. So that's kind of the rabbit hole I went down in terms of being involved in metal music, and I haven't looked back ever since.
Amazing. So it's funny because as you're rattling these names off, it's so funny how if you take them out of context, they sound pretty morbid. Some of them, right? And I kind of want to ask you about that. So, having been a newbie to metal doing this tour, I got to kind of see like what I liked and what I resonated with. And what I actually
Hmm.
resonated with was the more extreme, like aggressive stuff. Like, for example, in Nagoya Temple
Hmm.
and the band that went before it, where it was like a lot of screaming and just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
a lot of that really heavy drumming and really heavy bass. I really like that stuff. And I think the reason why is because it is very raw. It's not decorative. And it really shows that like, a lot of in regular society, we're really not allowed to express these extreme emotions. Like, or like anger is like kind of looked frowned upon, right? To like feel angst and do all that is kind of frowned upon. But we're doing it in this very artistic and fun way when we engage with metal or other art forms that allow us to do it. And I
Hmm.
really resonate with that. And so kind of looking at that and then looking at kind of the themes that I see here with the band name titles and even like the album name titles and all of that, a lot of it is like kill the god or this god is dead, right? Like deicide. And okay, so where do you think that comes from and like why is that so prevalent in a lot of metal music?
I think because there's a lot of things to be angry about, and I think that it can be expressed. Hmm. I'm just trying to think of. It's because there are so many different topics that you could be completely angry about, and so like if you grow up very religious and you hate that, it's like that kind of gives you. Uh, I mean, metal is a perfect outlet for that. How it's very anti-authoritative and stuff, and how it hates being like like basically you have to meet society's expectations, and a lot of metal music kind of goes against that. They're very keen on just like living your life the way that you want to live it authentically as you can. And there's just a lot of things that you could just be, I mean, you can be like Napalm Death. A lot of their lyrics have to do with society and how an overly capitalist society is freaking terrible for mankind. So that's what a lot of their songs are based around. Gojira based a lot of their songs are about the environment and how we are complete idiots and we're destroying it. Same with Cattle Decapitation. Cattle Decapitation also talks about, there's like further back they went hard into like the veganism, vegetarianism. So they were very much like had a ton of lyrics that were based on animal rights. So, but there's also some like comedy metal bands that get angry because they stubbed their toe on the way out getting a coffee. So it's like there's endless stuff to be angry about. And that's why metal music, there's always been like, there's never been an end to being upset about something.
Yeah. What about for you personally? Have you ever felt like that was an outlet for you, or has metal ever helped you channel any kind of personal struggle?
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, I was bullied a lot, so it kind of felt like listening to bands like Slipknot and Korn and all these other bands that kind of was an outlet for aggression, and but more in a healthier sense. For like, so being in an environment where you could be with people that have a similar experience, and you can all kind of let this aggression out together in a healthy environment. It made the it made the music more authentic, and it also made like you could also just make new friends at shows because of your own shared experience. Like somebody kind of gets you.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's why metal is a very unique genre to get into, because not only it's the music, but it's also the people as well.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask a little bit of a deep question, and I don't know if there's an answer to this one because this is something that I ponder on a lot. Is like
It's
as
all
an
good.
artist, the way that I've related with my art has evolved
Mm,
over time. Like I think when I first started doing hip hop dance, it was more, I mean, I thought the movement was really cool and very challenging and, all of that. That was part of it. But I think part of it, it was because I grew up very shy. I didn't like to talk, but dance allowed me to be loud in a different way. And it allowed me to express some of the parts that I was afraid to express otherwise. And that included a lot of like the angst that I had. But as I matured in the art, like I realized that I had changed. And the way that I was doing my art also changed. I didn't, I no longer wanted to like just fuel raw emotion that like I couldn't control because like I realized that wasn't really healthy for me. And I had to also just kind of step back and deal with that before like I went through and explored my art again. Have you ever experienced anything like that where like your relationship with metal or like your drumming has changed too?
oh, absolutely. Like
Yeah.
I think because it's funny because every subgenre of metal has their own kind of different subculture itself. And being within progressive metal, where everybody is trying to be the most experimental, but also kind of tell a story, and how they're trying to genre bend a little bit by taking influences from a ton of other genres and putting it in metal context. That spoke to me more as I like kind of explored all these different genres. That one really speak to me, and it still speaks to me more than any other genre. Where when I was a kid, like death metal and thrash and all that stuff, where it was just so such raw anger emotion, it feels like there's ways to express that too, by not just saying like just not by not just like being overly aggressive. You can express it also with like a hint of sadness to it, with also some growth and happiness in a weird way, even though it's screaming, but there's also singing that's involved as well. So you get these kind of different ways to express all the emotions rather than just kind of throw it in all just in one emotion. There's many different ones that you can express. And it feels like that's changed my drumming, where I'm not holding the sticks as tightly as I
Yeah.
used to. It's like I can be a bit more relaxed because there's moments where there's a lot of like uplifting stuff, like Succumb, which we play in the set, which is like this really kind of uplifting song. And there's also Almost Town, which has a bit of a somber-ish tone to it, even though the song's like uplifting. But then there's also This God Is Dead, which goes like completely up and down the rails. And there's a lot of intense moments, but there's also some call and response, and how there's just ways of just expressing emotions as you get older, and you kind of understand just being a better musician rather than just kind of know this one thing and then just doing that only.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think that the more that I have progressed in my dance, I don't want because like the tendency in hip hop, where like in street style dances, you're like you're this type of dancer, you're this type of dancer, and you're this type of
Mhm.
dancer. People are very afraid to kind of go outside of their box some of
Mhm.
the time and like actually just be the artist and kind of use, especially for advanced people who have a lot of those skill sets. It's like, how do I then make it my own so that I'm a unique entity and all of that? So that
Totally.
really resonates. Yeah. I know you haven't been in Seven Spires for that long, but kind of knowing what you know, I noticed on their website they have lore as part of their kind of how they make their music. They have like a story behind it that's separate from actually just like it's like a fantasy story. And I've heard with other people describing metal during the time we were in Japan being like, oh, there's a lot of this band has a lot of fantasy. What does that mean?
So a lot of times, like sometimes a lot of bands that will have like a continuing story, and that's really heavily influenced by progressive music, which has one album that has a whole entire story based around whichever kind of storyline that they choose to have. Like sometimes you can have one record that's just about like one that's just a complete fantasy record where they're talking about like, oh, here's like it's like a kind of like a Lord of the Rings type of thing where it's like, oh, he goes, grabs the ring, gets all these friends along the way, and then he throws the ring into Mount Doom and then walks away from it. So sometimes like bands will have a continuing storyline, or sometimes bands will just do one, well, like a one-off story per record. So when they say a lot of fantasy, that's kind of the the environment that they create with each record kind of all ties together within the same linear story.
Interesting. Yeah. There was a very like theatrical component to it, I noticed
Hmm.
with a lot of the bands. I think there was also something you said about metal being kind of like classical music.
Hmm.
Yeah. Can you explain that a little bit more too?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the main distinction between rock and metal music is that rock is a very blues based style of music, where the difference with metal music is that it's very classical based. So it draws a lot of inspiration from Mozart and Bach and Beethoven and all the big classical composers, and it draws heavy influences from their playing. And metal music just kind of is taking what those composers have done and just adding electric guitars to it. So if you were to take metal songs and just completely strip it of all the drums and the bass and the guitars and the screaming, and if you put that to like violins and piano, it's classical music.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the video game series Final Fantasy?
Oh, of course.
Okay. Have you played any of them?
Like I played seven like a long,
Okay.
long time ago, and 10, but I haven't played. So I've played actually wait, played 7, 8, and 10,
Okay.
but and then Dissidia, which was like
Okay.
the fighting game.
Because as soon as you were talking about that, because I'm playing Seven Rebirth right now, and the battle theme is, I think, is metal. They
Yeah, oh,
have
yeah,
that, yeah, but it is also classical. I think a lot
yeah.
of that, yeah, they incorporate a lot of that, and it's like, yeah, that is actually really true. That was the first thing that popped into my head. Yeah, I feel like I've been around metal music so much, I just like never really paid attention to it. But like once I thought about it, like, yeah, it's so prevalent everywhere. There's something that you said. So while we were in Japan, on one of the last days of our trip, we went down to Fukuoka and we went to this vegan restaurant in
Mm.
the kind of in the boonies of Fukuoka. And I remember you saying something about wanting to be a health, like wanting to do what you do, but like in a more healthy way. Do
Mm.
you remember saying that?
Oh, so I think that's because of the audition that I did for
Okay.
Spires.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, because a lot of the times when it comes to doing like music itself is a very being involved in whatever genre that you're in, and if you're doing this as as a living, a lot of the jobs are they're hard to come by because it's either a rotating door of musicians that only have like that only last for a couple of shows to maybe a month, maybe if you're lucky a year, or it could just be a weekend. So whenever you're like, and I think this resonates with a lot of musicians as well, is that whenever you're auditioning for a band, you put a lot of yourself into that audition, especially if you think that you have especially if you have like a massive task ahead of you when you're learning a band's discography. So for me, it was like doing the Spires audition. It was going through literally, it was 8 hours of just learning that this one particular part of the song. Because for my audition piece, I had to do This God Is Dead, which is the song that we played on the last night, as well as in Osaka. And when I was listening to that song, I'm like, I love how it transitions from different moods and tones and how the lyrics reflect each part so well and doesn't feel like it's a copy and paste thing. So as I'm listening to it, I'm like, okay, this part I know I can do, this part I know I can do. And then when it came to the super fast double kick part, I can like in the back of my head is like I can play fast, but I can't play that fast. And so I had to learn a totally new skill to try and at least get to that level. So it was really trying to learn how to get to that particular speed, which was so challenging, and that you're just saying like practicing it over and over and over and over again. And like the a lot of the time there's like that voice in the back of your mind saying like you're never going to get it, you're not going to get it, you can't get that, and you just have to like ignore that and just continue to do that over like and just continue the progress. And so doing it more in a healthier way would not be what I did for the audition for Spires.
Okay.
So I think sometimes you have to be a little bit kinder to yourself
Oh, yeah.
whenever you're doing auditions. I didn't do that for me, but I think if I was to do that audition again, I'd be like, dude, you're learning something that wasn't in your wheelhouse before, and you're learning something in 3 weeks that really realistically should take you a couple months to learn. And I was just lucky enough to get it to that level in that amount of time.
I think that's a really valuable little bit for anyone who's an artist out there, because I I didn't go into commercial dancing because I couldn't handle the audition process.
Mm.
Uh, it was really hard for me. It would be very emotionally draining, right? Because you have to go into one audition after the other. You're never against so many other people, and every time you get rejected, it is hard to tell yourself, I'm just not good enough, you know?
Mm.
Whereas sometimes it's not even about how skilled you are, but there's a persistence that, and kind of like a not putting your own value on the outcome
Mm.
of whatever it is like, but putting in the work, obviously, right?
Oh, totally.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
'Cause-
think, yeah, we get really discouraged sometimes.
yeah, I mean, because a lot of the times, like we put like dancers or musicians or actors or anything like that, a lot of the times people put a lot of their self-worth into their art itself. And that is a really tough thing to separate because you put a lot of your identity and your personality as well as how you express yourself through art. And it's really tough to distinguish, to separate the two. Like your worth is more than your art. And that is something that every like artist kind of struggles with. And even though they know in the back of their head that they're two totally separate things, it's really hard for it to be to for it to kind of be two permanent things, and then they're just constantly going back and forth. Yeah. So it's tough, but I think sometimes you just have to be a little bit kinder to yourself. And even though that can be very, very hard at times.
How would you say you will approach it in the future? Like, is there anything that you would do differently or exercises you do? I don't know.
I'm not I'm not entirely sure. Like I think I would have to be thrown into that in order to kind of to figure that out. But I think I mean, I would like to be a lot more kinder to myself if I was ever in that position again, because it's a lot to do in such a short amount of time. But I think there's other ways of just kind of practicing and progressing rather than just bludgeoning yourself with this continuous thing over and over and over again, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think maybe what you're getting at, which I think is very difficult, it is like being very mindful of the mindset.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
That's
Yeah.
exactly it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is something that I work with people a lot, but it is like I don't think we all realize that sometimes it is just the way of that shifting perspective, but the hard lessons sometimes have to also be learned before we realize that we need to do that, right?
Hmm.
So, yeah, so I'll be curious later on what you think if you ever come up against that question again.
Hmm.
How do you maintain So, we have the mental health aspect here, but like when you're on tour, there's also the physical aspect that you have to maintain, right? And I feel
Hmm.
like, I asked, I think it was, I think I asked Brian from Lords, was the Japan tour harder or easier than the other tours that he's done? He said it's probably on par because there was so much going on, right? Because while you guys were playing the shows, even though everything was organized and all of that, there was also the tourism schedule that everyone was trying to follow too, along with the music performances. So how did you find that experience? And like also how do you maintain your condition while you're traveling like that?
Getting plenty of sleep. That's like the most important thing, especially because you're playing like practically every single night. You have to be really conscious of your time. That's a huge factor because you have only a certain amount of hours to sound check if you get one, where normally it's like normally it's like 15 minutes, and then you're on stage for an hour, and then you also have to get ready, then you also have to take all the gear out and then make your way back to the hotel or wherever you're staying. Majority of the time it's usually either in a van or a tour bus, or sometimes if you're lucky you get a hotel. So how you basically use your time is the most important thing to basically being able to continuously play on a consistent basis. So like that means like even on your day off, it's like don't go out don't go out drinking like
Hmm.
all hours of the night. Make sure that you get plenty of sleep, make sure that you are eating, because sometimes it's very easy to forget when you're got a lot of things that are going on, you know. So and then kind of keeping that routine is just good because it's just good for your health in general. That's
Yeah.
just kind of flat out what it is. But on this tour, it was, I would say in terms of the physical side of it, it was, I would agree with Brian. It's pretty on par with other tours. But sometimes that threshold can be different for everybody.
Yeah.
Sometimes people have a higher threshold where they can, it's not going to be as physically draining, or they're able to get enough sleep with 5 hours. Sometimes people need a full 8 hours. So it really depends on the person.
Mhm.
And also a big important factor is if you notice somebody is sick, you know,
Yeah.
be sure to, like not stay away, but like mask up and make sure that you're like you have everything on hand. If you were to get sick, then be conscious of the people around you so that you're not getting them sick. because you don't want to jeopardize the show at all or anything like that. Yeah, so like if I, because I remember like I had a bit of a cough in Hiroshima and it's like masking up, and then when we did the next show, it's like mask up again, and then take the mask off when you do the show, and then put it back on. So it's like it's a whole thing, that's for sure.
Yeah, I noticed this as well. And it was 50 something people, inevitably, you know?
It was gonna happen, yeah.
Yeah, it was going to happen. But I think people were pretty good with doing the mask and like making sure to keep distance and all of that. And I,
Oh yeah,
in terms of the outcome of that, I'm really glad that none of the band members had too much of an issue. We had a little bit, but
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So we're going to close up this interview. Let us know what you've got going on, what the Seven Spires has got going on for 2025, and where we can find your music and such.
Yeah, so we there's a lot that's going on with the Seven Spires this year. I can't say too much about it, but we are playing Wacken Open Air later on in the summer, which is the biggest heavy metal festival in the world, and we're super super excited to go and play there. We also have Legions of Metal Festival in Chicago in May, and then we play another show in Germany a couple days after that. And there's a lot more shows to be announced, but can't say anything at the moment. But it's going to be another busy year, that's for sure. And we're all really excited and looking forward to what comes up this year.
Amazing. And what about any things that you're personally looking forward to in this year?
Anything looking forward to this year? There's a lot, and I can't really say too much about it because it's so like I want to say all the things, but there's a couple of session gigs I'm personally really excited about to announce. There's a lot of things with Seven Spires. I would love to share with you, but I just can't at the moment because it's like top secret. And but we'll have some announcements really soon. But yeah, it's looking like it's going to be another busy year, and just really excited to get started.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dylan, for being on here today. I want to shout out to everyone who made the Japan tour possible. I just say hi to everyone too. Yeah. Thank you, Seven Spires. Thank you, Lords of the Trident, Ty, for putting that tour together. Packset, which was the tour company that I was helping out for the trip. I have learned so much from you guys. It was really a heartwarming experience. I learn everything every time that I travel. And so I am really grateful that I made actual friends on this trip, that I was able to connect with all of you and really get to know a world that I knew very little about before. So thank you, Dylan.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you today. Yeah.
Same to you.
All right, awesome. Catch you later.